Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcella Harris, and as the director of the Lewiston Public Library, I'd like to welcome you all to the Great Falls Forum. The forum is a monthly speaker series featuring leaders in the areas of business, public policy, academia, and the arts, and is a partnership of Bates College, the Sun Journal, and the Lewiston Public Library. This year marks the 25th season of the Great Falls Forum, so we thank you for your support in ensuring that this program can continue. Today's program is also streaming live via Zoom and on Facebook, and a recording will be available on the library's YouTube page. Visit lplonline.org for more information. Please mark your calendars for our next Great Falls Forum on April 20th. This will feature Andrea Berry, who is Executive Director of the Wild Seed Project, with a talk entitled Planting Seeds of Resilience with Wild Seed Project. Information will be available on the library website very soon. At the conclusion of today's program, there will be opportunity for audience questions. So if those of you in the room can raise your hands, we're going to run a microphone over to you. Please do use the microphone so that our audience at home and on the recording can hear you and your questions. Those joining us virtually can answer their questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen, or if on Facebook, you can just type your questions in the comments, and then we're happy to relay those to our panelists. And now I'd like to start today's program by introducing our panel moderator, Nancy McBrady, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. Nancy joined the department in 2019 as the director of the Bureau of Agriculture, Food, and Rural Resources. She transitioned to Deputy Commissioner in January of this year. Before the department, she served as the executive director of the Wild Blueberry Commission of Maine, where she actually spoke at the Great Falls Forum a few years ago. At the commission, she directed programs for marketing and promotion, research and development, and policy engagement. Nancy previously practiced environmental land use and municipal law at one of Maine's largest law firms, and also served as a trustee of the Nature Conservancy of Maine. She's a graduate of Williams College and the University of Maine School of Law. Please join me in welcoming Nancy to welcome all of our panelists.
Thank you, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm delighted that you're here to hear about Maine agriculture, which is an incredibly rich and diverse subject matter, which cannot possibly be distilled down into an hour. But for 1 hour, we get to shine a light on what is Maine agriculture. And I like to think of it as a diverse environment. We have approximately 7,600 farms in the state of Maine. Most of them are small, and they use the term diversified to describe themselves because rarely do they only grow one thing. Certainly we have farmers in the county and in down East Maine that might be doing wild blueberries or potatoes, but they also might be rotating their crops with broccoli, or they might be doing something else in the wintertime when the wild blueberries are going dormant. We have folks who are doing produce, small livestock. You'll hear from folks who are doing farming, almost agroforestry as well, and they can talk about that as well. But a snapshot of what Maine agriculture means and valued at prior to the pandemic, direct sales from Maine goods and products sold agriculturally was over $2 billion. And the overall economic impact agriculture adds to Maine pre-pandemic was $3.6 billion. And there were about 25,000 jobs credited towards the agricultural landscape as a whole in the state of Maine. And we also boast some statistics that buck some trends nationwide. We do have growing numbers of younger farmers. We also have more female farmers, and we also have a growing cohort of new American farmers. And that's just a delight to see. And our department really is hopeful that those trends can grow in Maine, despite some pretty heavy headwinds that are affecting agriculture generally and a lot of business and industry across the United States. But with that, let me segue over to the folks who can give more color commentary about these things for the next 55 minutes or so. So I am delighted to introduce Tori Lee Jackson. She is the program administrator for agriculture and natural resources at the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. And I do have to stress how important cooperative extension and the University of Maine plays in agriculture in the state of Maine and the education and resource building that they do. So I'm very pleased that she's here. Tori has spent most of her career working with farms and other natural resource-based businesses throughout Maine, with a focus on farm business management and new and beginning farmer education. She serves as co-chair of the Maine Farmer Resource Network, a group of 30 organizations and institutions working together for farm business success. Her background is in fruit and vegetable production and integrated pest management, also known as IPM, working at Highmore Farm, a Maine agricultural and forest experiment station in Monmouth, in various capacities, 15 years. Her research has evaluated various organic controls for, I don't know how to say this word, corn earworm and commercial elderberry production. Thank you. Jill Agnew also joins us today. She began farming at Willow Pond Farm in Sabattis in 1982. It is a 35-acre farm, 7 acres of which are MOFGA, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, certified organic vegetables and berries. Several acres of pasture support a small flock of sheep, laying hens, pigs, turkeys, and broilers, and the remaining working land supports the fruit orchard, which includes a variety of apples, pears, peaches, and plums. Jill started the first community-supported agricultural entity, CSA, in the state at Willow Farm back in 1989, which still continues, and my family has been a member and supporter of for a very long time. So we can attest to how wonderful this is. Willow Pond Farm continues its commitment to the community by offering its members the most cost-effective way to get a variety of seasonal, fresh, local, and organic produce, while also playing a part in sustaining good land stewardship and nurturing a food system. The farm has mentored over 95 apprentices, some of whom continue to work in agriculture today. The farm also has a year-round farm store that offers a variety of products, including fresh, frozen, and shelf-stable food items, yarn, pottery, and more. And last but not least, Nikki LaRue and Justin Triquet join us today. They are owners of Forest Fungi Farms and are also co-founders of Rent a Farmer, which they'll speak to today. This duo are business partners and multifaceted farmers by passion. They have a genuine appreciation for the land and what grows on it and in it. They have traveled throughout the country working on farms of all types and sizes and have brought this experience here to Maine. They are devoted chaga farmers and also have launched a business to provide short and midterm staffing to farms and homesteaders to help fill voids in the labor market. So I have asked our panelists today to prepare remarks that talk about a couple of different things. And the first question, sort of a long question, that I will be posing to Tori and then going down the panel starts as this. What are the top 3 emerging issues, trends, observations that you identify based on your experience as new developments in Maine agriculture? And why are they happening? What do they mean for the future here in Maine?
Well, thank you, Nancy. I'm really happy to be here and part of this group today. So when she asked for just, it took to narrow it down. From my perspective as an ag service provider and not a farmer myself, I see a lot of different issues and needs that are arising in agriculture right now. The first of which is a new focus from the education standpoint and the service provider standpoint, those of us who support farmers in many different ways, is a focus on farmer wellness. We are really trying to put more emphasis on mental health and not just physical health. Of course, we all think of working hard, using their bodies, and we have programs to help with that. But mental health is a really big deal too. Farmers spend a lot of time on their own, in their barns, in their fields, and they go through a lot of stresses. And we'll get to some of those in a moment. But I think the pandemic really put a spotlight on how fragile our food system is and how much stress our food producers are under. And we feel that normalizing discussions of farmer wellness in a more holistic way and offering programming and support will hopefully lead to more resilient farms and farm families, their businesses, and reduce some of those really unfortunate things that happen at a higher rate on farms, including suicides, divorces, or business failures. We're really hoping to reach folks before things ever get to the point of crisis on their farm. The second thing I think that is really important to think about right now in terms of our beginning farmer population, that's where I spend a lot of my time, a lot of my career has been working with beginning farmers and helping their businesses get started. And in the past 5 or 10 years, there's been a huge uptick in interest in farming amongst returning military veterans. And we have spent a lot of time in Extension reaching out to that particular group and learning about the nuances of teaching that population that might be different from, kids who are coming out of college or maybe leaving an apprenticeship or an internship program. They're just at a very different place in their lives, and they've had very different kinds of experiences. Often there are different financial implications. Those who have retired out of the military, for example, often their biggest obstacle is not, financial and being able to buy a property. There are many other things. And we're finding that folks, military veterans and others who are looking for second and third careers are interested in working outdoors. They're interested in working with animals. Being your own boss is often cited as a priority for folks who are coming at ag later in life. And we are often seeing people coming from typically corporate climates, really looking for a big shift in their lifestyle as well as their occupation. The learning curve can be steep for those folks. So, they may not have as many financial obstacles, but if they don't have any hands-on experience with livestock or operating a tractor or how seeds grow, there's really a lot of hands-on help that we can help provide from the education standpoint. We do have some programs that are up and running here in Maine that are very successful. And all these startups do tend to be pretty small, as most of our farms in Maine do tend to be. So that's been a big focus of my work lately. And the third thing that I think is coloring a lot of the discourse around ag right now, from my perspective, is a new recognition amongst the general consumer about some of the threats that are facing Maine's agricultural industries, such as those posed by PFAS. You've likely heard about these forever chemicals in the news, solar farms, and the need to diversify our energy infrastructure, coming up against, maybe someone's need to pass their land on to a new farmer. All this open land that is sitting and ready for development. Is it the best and highest use to put solar panels on it, or is it to maintain that as a farm? And the third one that we're seeing a lot in the news right now is obviously, avian influenza and the risks that pandemics, something we're all very familiar with now, can pose to our food system and not just to people. I think we've all seen the price of eggs at the grocery store skyrocket, and that's a direct result of this pandemic of highly pathogenic avian influenza. So the PFAS issue is constantly evolving. We're trying to ramp up as much as we can at the university in terms of research. We'll be opening a lab in the coming years. We're really excited about to help us respond more rapidly to farms who are discovering this issue. We're balancing the upsides of generating energy with the need for open land for the new solar facilities with the financial realities of, a farmer who's retiring may have most of their assets tied up in their land value. And how do we make sure that they retire comfortably and that land remains in farming? And I think all of these things will impact the prices and availability of many of the products that we are able to buy from our local farmers and the sustainability of farm businesses in Maine.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Jill as well. What are the trends and observations that you're seeing, giving your vantage point in Maine agriculture, and what do you believe they mean for the future of farming in Maine?
Well, I left all my notes at home, so this is off memory. But I think over the past I've been in this for like 40 some years, and one of the first things I thought of was how more people are aware of local agriculture now and are trying to interact with their farms. And I think the supermarket mentality of the 50s kind of ran its course, and now people are more interested in buying local and fresh produce. So that's changed the picture of the small farms in Maine. Maine is really lucky to have a lot of small farms. Our model is small. And when I started the CSA in '89, the thing that was speaking to is also people's need for community and a personal involvement in their food. And I think that has a long way still to go, but I think there are people that value forming a community as part of their food system too, not just having availability of lots of products, but feeling the seasonality of what they're eating. And so I feel like Maine is really well positioned to keep that trend going, keep the farms small. The COVID coming along really made people's eyes open up even more. And I hate to say that was really helpful, but it really was helpful. The value of small farms became huge. The second thing, the second thing that's come up for me is the labor shortage. There's agriculture requires a lot of manual labor, and keeping things small means we are not very well mechanized in agriculture, which means humans are doing all that work. And when I was 25, I felt like a machine. That was all good. The more I could do, the more I liked it. But, I'm 68 now and things kind of look a little different. And so the sustainability of a system that relies on manual labor isn't as sustainable as it might be. I mean, you definitely have to look at the sustainability. Sure, you can hire the labor, but eventually that same labor, they're going to get tired. It's not a 20-year machine. It's a human being with a lifespan. And in thinking about this, I realized that the agricultural model that attracted me from the very beginning was not necessarily a business model. Like agriculture at the level we're performing agriculture is a more, I'm not sure how to say it, a human lifestyle choice, and not necessarily your perfect business model. And when you take it out of that realm, you realize the value of these small farms are the open space, the scenery, the peace you might get looking out over a vista of, cows grazing, or there's no monetary value to any of that. It's just a soulful thing that farms are providing in this state and aren't getting paid for it. And so it doesn't fit into a business model of any kind. Which takes me to the next part is a lot of farmers are aging out. And as Tori was mentioning, there's a big transition in farmland now. How are we going to do this? Like the land prices, I tried to do a little synopsis. Our taxes from the year we started and bought the farm, we were lucky. We bought the farm in like 81 when, 29-year-olds could afford a farm, but 29-year-olds can't afford a farm now. And then to go into a farming situation and then have to make enough money to pay the mortgage and to pay for the incredible increase in supply costs. Like the beginning few years, I showed our taxes and expenses went up maybe 10% each year. Inflation set at what, 6 or 8%, but our costs still went up more than inflation goes up every year. The past 2 years, our taxes, our expenses went up 30 to 60%. Our labor went up 60% in 2 years. And okay, how do you keep up with that? I went and, the spinach is still $5 a bag, and it was $5 a bag 10 years ago. So the costs we're able to actualize is not keeping up with what our expenses are. That's just not sustainable. So we need to find a model that works for everybody. You can't change what it costs for people to go to, I try, Hannaford and get things for a low price. You can't change that. Individuals can't change that. But how do we make it as small farmers? What do we offer? What can we draw people to the farm and market things for what it's going to take us to grow them? I don't have the answer. I've been spending all winter battling over how to do this, and it's not a problem solved. I just feel like we have a lot to offer, and the small farms in this state, they can't be let go. It's just like morally wrong if we don't find a way to sustain the small farms in Maine. I don't even know if I answered your question.
I think you did.
Okay.
That was terrific.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Jill. Justin, you have a very unique background that I'd love for you to touch on as you talk about your version of farming in Maine. But given your background and what you do, can you answer this question as well? What are your observations about emerging trends or important issues surrounding agriculture in Maine today?
Sure. Well, thank you, Nancy, and fellow panelists. One of the new developments in agriculture in Maine began by our experiences working at all different kinds of farms all over Maine. From new beginning homesteaders to large scale production farms, we found that they all had one commonality, and that was a lack of labor. Being shorthanded affects a whole lot more than just farmers having to work from sun up until midnight every day. Projects begin to back up and then they pile up. And the vicious circle continues until sometimes it even just completely runs the farm down. We developed a company called Just Nick's Rent-A-Farmers, and since 2020 have been helping Maine homesteaders and production farms with short to midterm projects such as fixing leaks on a chicken house roof, erecting 3,000 square foot greenhouses, and operating heavy equipment during grass cuts or corn season at the second largest dairy farm in New England. This doesn't just help with aesthetics, but it also helps the farms become profitable and stay operational. With products checked off the list, our vision was to help spur innovation and make farming more efficient. Coupled with providing project labor, Rent-A-Farmers also helps to empower small farms, the ones we were just talking about, and homesteaders who lack the revenue for year-round employment. Another new development in Maine agriculture isn't just new to Maine, but it's actually brand new to the United States as of last year. This type of farming doesn't take place in the field like traditional farming does, or in greenhouses or in raised bed gardens. This type of completely organic farming actually takes place in the forest. The cultivation of chaga mushroom on birch trees in the forest has been successfully accomplished and done in many parts of the world since the early 2000s. Places like Korea, Estonia, Finland have all been able to offset a lot of their import costs by cultivating chaga in the forest where it grows naturally. Just an added piece to this, the United States imports over 100,000 pounds of chaga mushroom every month. And we import those from places who are growing it, Korea, China, so on and so forth. Why would we want, for instance, corn? Why would we import corn? Can grow it naturally right here. There's a lot of forest here in our big, beautiful state, and 95% of it is privately owned. landowners have had only but one option for income when it comes to their land to be generated from their forest, and that's harvesting. And while keeping our forest trimmed down is certainly necessary in the state of Maine, or else there's going to be trees everywhere, it has become less and less lucrative for landowners. By partnering with landowners and using their forest as a surrogate to grow chaga mushroom, it adds a hassle-free, zero maintenance option for our landowners in now a new division of farming, agroforestry. Chaga farming also provides landowners with a new and valuable source of income, as all of the chaga that is grown on the lands, the company actually buys all of that back. This has appealed to mushroom enthusiasts, landowners looking for a solid investment, farm owners with land surrounding their field, and landowners of all sizes looking to help their forest make them money as opposed to just sitting idle. This type of farming appeals to so many because it requires minimal inputs, such as zero pesticides or fertilizers, as zero soil disturbance, and offering a sustainable yielding crop. Chaga farming gives landowners new options to generate income from their land instead of only being able to harvest their trees. It can also allow existing farmers to diversify their crop portfolio with it adding this addition to medicinal mushrooms.
That's terrific. And I think that's a great example of that diversification. I feel as though, again, the model farm in Maine does realize the need from a business perspective to have to diversify. And agroforestry, I think, is an underutilized element to the points that you just mentioned. Many farms in Maine are also woodlot owners because they have surrounding woodlands. And so I think there's a great opportunity for that. And Jill, to your experience, when did you develop the farm store? Was that at the same time as CSA, or was that a later development? Right.
Oh, sorry. So we just rebuilt the farm stand probably, I think it was a year before COVID, so probably in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
We recognized that we needed to sell more products to the people that drove by all the time. So that
Right.
was more recent and a diversification
Right. Yep.
motivation.
So given the fact that there are many intractable issues that face Maine agriculture, our producers, our processors, our laborers, what can the public and what can the private sector, what can public policy makers do or need to hear in order to possibly change course or add more support for this unique population? Excuse me. Tori, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure. I think in terms of farmer resilience and holistic health, it's really important, as it has been for many years, to continue advocating for healthcare and to recognize that mental health care is healthcare, and it should be available to all business owners, all small business owners who can't afford to buy a giant policy that you might be purchasing on behalf of a company with hundreds or thousands of employees. There should be high quality healthcare available to everyone at every income level. And similarly, I think quality, affordable childcare is really important for these business owners. We've heard, the number of hours that it takes to operate a farm. It's actually far greater than most businesses, because you've got to take advantage of the sunshine and the weather when you can, and then do all of those other things in the office when the sun goes down or when the kids are asleep. And it just comes, as a matter of course that you need to have an option for young and school-age children so that you can do your job at the same time. And so we know that we need a better system for healthcare, and we know we need a better system for childcare to help us get to the point of a more resilient food system and thriving communities, so we can continue to support the small farms that Maine has in abundance. I also think, continuing support for the kinds of programs that are educating and in some cases financially supporting new and beginning farmer training programs. We have one in Maine called Bushels, which was established specifically for military veterans. So we incorporate the pieces that we've always done with, the basics of running a business and the hands-on, how to actually grow a crop or care for an animal, with an eye towards any of those special circumstances that a military veteran might be coming from, with past traumas, both physical, mental, and emotional. I also think it's really important to look for ways for efficient and fair farm transfer. So those folks who are leaving farming, who have had a successful and really important career in ag, to be able to allow them to retire, to enjoy some non-farm time if that's what they'd like to do. And also make that land affordable for the next generation. As Jill was saying, a 29-year-old beginning farmer probably couldn't walk in and buy her property today, as she was able to do in the 80s. So what can we do legislatively, either nationally or in the state, to ensure that our food system is a priority when we're looking at programs like this? I also think in terms of the general public, a recognition that our food prices continue to rise even after the inflation rate comes down. Even when we get to that mythical 2% again, our food prices are not going to suddenly drop. That's not how inflation works, and it's certainly not how food pricing works these days, given the other things that are really pushing up all of the costs, not least of which is labor. Any subsidized programs that USDA looks at, or any of those other big agencies who are funding the food system, should be, I think, encouraging institutions to buy from small and local producers whenever possible. I'd hope supporting legislation like the Farm Bill that allows for large food programs like SNAP, to allow small producers to participate, so that some of those big federal dollars get spread across some of our smaller farms, as well as some of the larger operations at the commodity scale.
Thank you. Jill, what would you say are some of those messages you'd want to share with the public and policymakers?
The one thing, or I think of a lot of things, but the one thing I thought of that would be a really interesting, or has been an interesting development, is trying to create more community hubs, so that I think the model of single family farms becomes more difficult long term, because the farmer gets old or tired, and then you have to move into something else. And I think if we never had that dramatic change from a single family farm for 25, 30 years, and then that just had to be a new person or a new operation or something, and it could be more seamless by kind of seeing what a community could support and need as far as a collective food growing neighborhood that could kind of not begin and end so dramatically, just kind of more seg into the next generation or the next bunch of growers. I know the Maine Farmland Trust is trying to do that up in Unity, and I think it's Unity, but I think there are a lot of communities that could possibly support a hub. I think education and legislative support would be really valuable. I think it's really hard to change people's frame of thinking to support a local system, but I would love to see more of that evolving in each and every community, really. I think promoting community empowerment would be a direction I would like to see us all go in. I don't know if I said anything else on there. Yeah, I guess that's kind of the main thing. It could definitely feed into supplying local businesses the schools, oh my gosh, the opportunity for giving the schools better food would be a real shift in our future overall. So I think.
I think if I add just a little bit to it, there's something that I think communities forget the power that they have at a local municipal level. Zoning, economic development opportunities, tax assessment, tax breaks, et cetera. Some of these policies are controlled at a local municipal level. And I know our municipal staff and members work exceptionally hard on a myriad of issues that face a local community every day. But don't forget about ag. Like it's there, and it is an underpinning for all the reasons that this panel is saying, whether it's the open space or the employment of local employees, returning money through taxes, et cetera. So it sometimes gets forgotten, and farms are just seen as single entities. They're on their own, but it's not. It literally does take a village and a community. And so don't forget the levers at a municipal level to offer support. So Justin and Nikki, how about you folks? What would you like to impress upon our audience?
One thing that can be done, we feel as though that, there's a bit of a misnomer when it comes to farmers. People think that you either have to you have to wear suspenders, you have to know what a pitchfork is, and you best be able to drive that tractor. And that's really not all that's entailed to farming. We think that if there's a greater awareness to the different jobs that are actually on the farm, for instance, somebody who's a mechanic doesn't realize that there's actually a load of jobs and a big need for that on the farm. And if you're a heavy equipment operator, same thing. Even if you're a daycare worker, okay, you love children and so on and so forth, there's plenty of places for you to fit that role on a farm. Many people don't realize, as we've talked about on a number of points here today, how many moving parts there actually are on a farm, and how many different skills are actually needed to make all of those parts move. That's another reason why farmers are considered jacks of all trades, masters of none. And this is most of the time done out of necessity, not by choice. So bringing awareness to that would help funnel more of those jobs into both those small farms and those large farms as well. Another thing that policymakers can do with regarding to chaga mushroom farming is to start to develop policies that will consider the cultivation of chaga mushroom in the forest as a crop. And we've actually already begun working with policymakers on this. This will help our landowners to take advantage of similar benefits that are available to traditional farmers. And certainly if there were more people in places that were willing to do similar things like this all around the state of Maine, that would help to open the doors wider and awareness for anything and everything farming.
We're going to open this up to audience questions, but I'll kick this off. I'm curious, Justin and Nikki, based on your experience and your business model right now, whether you would ever contemplate your own farm as opposed to helping other farmers out.
That's actually part of our retirement plan. So part of our retirement plan is that we're going to end up having our own farm. So
perfect. That's great. Great. This is the gentleman with the, yes, go ahead. Oh.
Thank you. You've all listed a lot of the problems with farming. Can you tell us one thing that you've seen in the last year or two that gives you hope, which gives us hope for the future?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Maine and New England as a whole, and I think Maine specifically, is really focused on local food in a way that most of the rest of the country is not. And so despite some of the issues that we're facing, I think we're going to be okay. I think there are enough people going into agriculture, recognizing it as a viable career and recognizing the things that Jill was mentioning, the value of open space, the value of being a place in the community that is not only functional and contributing to the economy, but is also beautiful and provides that sense of place for, when you're deciding where you want to live. Not everyone wants to be a farmer, but I'll tell you what, I want to where Jill is because it's beautiful. She's maintaining a piece of our heritage and our landscape that is incredibly valuable. And I think more people are recognizing that. And I think the future looks pretty bright for small farms from that perspective.
Any other panelists want to add to that?
Another piece of that is, we've seen a number of people, and we actually built 2 farms last spring for couples who actually moved out of the city and into this area, and they were in their 70s, and they said, "Listen, we're city people. We're from Portland. We want to become sustainable and we want to become self-sufficient, but we lack the skills and the knowledge to know how to do it. We need a farm, we need vegetables grown, we need to learn how to do all these things." So with this whole movement of the health and wellness sector kind of moving along and more of an aspiration for healthy living, we feel as though all of that kind of coupled in together really is saying that the farming market is kind of increasing as opposed to decreasing here in the state of Maine. And what a better place to start it than here in Maine.
Jill, do you want to add anything? Positive thoughts? Or
I didn't mean to make it sound like it was all no. It's just that the reason we're all here and doing what we do, or at least for myself, is the positive attributes of farming outweigh the hardship, the long hours, the lack of pay, the hard health. It's like, who cares? I wouldn't choose anything else. So it's a lifestyle choice, and that's never going to go away. The people that choose to do this will always choose to do this. We have to make sure they can continue to do this. And that is asking the rest of the world to make it possible for people that have committed their life to something like this, as hard as it may be, and it doesn't match the rest of the world. It doesn't match the rest of the economic world. But there are plenty of people that have the skills and the heart to do this. And it's everyone else's responsibility as well as our own to support that.
so I'm going to make a note. We have one question here, gentleman by the window over here, and then up front again. Okay, go ahead.
A couple of questions. How do you folks, more traditional farmers, relate to the hydroponic folks growing tomatoes up in
Madison.
near Kingfield, and then the glow in the sky in Lisbon right down the road with fish, beneath? That's part of the ag market, and it's a totally different. Number two, I think the National Farm Bill is to redone every 5 years, and I think that's coming up. And there's always this business about what's always favored big ag, with the corn farmers in Iowa. Maybe Laura could talk a little bit how, and Shelley Pingree can help bring things this way to the smaller farmer.
Yeah, as to, all the different ways that farmers are growing indoors these days. It's not just hydroponic. We do have the lettuce and the fish over here on Lisbon Falls. We've got tomatoes and cucumbers in Madison. And lots of our more traditional farms have incorporated pieces of this into their existing diversified operations. It's a way to extend the growing season, to mitigate some of the extreme risk posed by weather, and to bring more local foods that we might not have here in the winter here year round. So it's a different model. I think, like in any aspect of agriculture, there are pieces that need to be worked out from a regulatory perspective and that sort of thing. But I think it's all great. And if it works financially for the farmer, I think it can a good piece of the overall food system here in Maine. In terms of Farm Bill, yeah, you're absolutely right. We're coming down to the wire on negotiating what this new bill is going to look like. traditionally, a lot of the major, subsidies that we hear about are geared towards the big commodity growers in the Midwest. That's where most of our calories come from. And so it makes sense that historically, many of those programs would be focused on that. However, the biggest piece of the Farm Bill is actually SNAP, what is formerly food stamps and food subsidies for those who have trouble affording healthy food. So that's really the biggest piece, and the piece that I never want to see go away. But I do think it gets overshadowed by some of the talk around farm subsidies and other things that are also a piece of it. I think here in Maine, we have had an amazing delegation in the past few years who have really rallied around Maine's small and diversified farms and said, what do you need? How can we get something for you in this huge legislation that wasn't designed for you initially? And we actually do have some really great things included in the Farm Bill now that we are able to take advantage of. Some of the education programs that I referred to earlier, the new and beginning farmer education, boots to bushels, agribility, which works with farmers with disabilities of any kind. These all these funds come through the Farm Bill initially. And so there are definitely ways for Maine to tap in to some of those things. And I would, if you have any questions about that, please, we can chat more about that. We can talk to our local legislators, but I'm grateful that they are very aware of those issues. So yeah, thanks for the question.
I'll just leapfrog on for a second with respect to hydroponic and aquaponic and seed extension technology. We are facing the realities of climate change, both in Maine and throughout the entire planet. One of the things that technologies that aren't new, but are getting more of a toehold here in Maine allow is for greater development and production without the reliance of transcontinental trucking or other types of movement to get the food here. So there's a real positive. I don't want to in any way denigrate the good work of our farmer colleagues in California, but they have a host of problems at their own door, relative to climate change, which literally is playing out right now. So I think that this is going to be a broader wave in Maine, where we're going to see more of this produce developed here in northern New England and not necessarily in California or Arizona. But please go ahead, and the gentleman back. Lois, we're getting to you.
Hi. So I sort of have like two types of questions. You mentioned the. Oh, okay.
It might be me. I'm sorry.
There was mention of the flu that's going around with birds. And I remember that wild turkeys played were a big part of the problem with that. And so I guess one of the sort of questions I have is, like, in your experience, what has been the relationship between hunters and farmers? And then I'd modify that by saying like farmers and then like hunters of color. That's one question I have. The other question I had was like, is there any insight into the relationship that indigenous people had to chaga before 2000 or even before the arrival of Europeans?
So the HPAI outbreak that we're seeing right now is being brought across the country by migratory birds. So any birds that leave here in the fall and come back in the spring, that's when we really see the spread of that virus to places it hasn't been before. I'm sure there are wild turkeys who are impacted, but they have not been implicated in the spread of that any other bird here in Maine. I guess I would say I'm not the expert on hunting, so I can't say for sure what impact that would have on HPAI specifically, or potentially some other issues that exist within our wildlife populations. Certainly, our colleagues at IF&W are paying attention to the populations. Many of our species that Maine is known for, moose, for example, the deer population right now, our herd is very large. And it used to be, growing up, I never saw a wild turkey. And now I have a flock of 30 every day in my yard. Certainly something is going on there. I'm not sure of the correlation between HPAI and that specifically, but I'd be happy to look into it for you.
Chaga mushroom's actually been used for its remarkable health benefits thousands of years. In 1938, the first study was done on chaga on human studies, and that was done by a Russian scientist. It really didn't have a lot of popularity until 1968, when a book called The Cancer Ward by Stolzenstein, Alexander Stolzenstein, was written, and that started bringing some awareness to, wait a second, chaga can be used for what? Because in this book, the author was a cancer and started using chaga mushroom in order to help cure his cancer and started giving it to other patients. So there seemed to be an uptick at that point, and there's been over 29,000 research papers done by different scientists. If you look on PubMed, the National Library of Medicine, that have been done on chaga.
I think Lois in the front wanted to get you have a question.
I'm interested if there any programs for farmers, but it seems to me that, as Jill said, part of the attraction of becoming a farmer is being by yourself, being your own boss. So that then you lose that labor, you know. But is there a way to make it more seamless, to interest more people in becoming part-time labor on farms, and support for that?
Well, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners have a very active apprenticeship program, and I think even the state is the state picking up on an apprenticeship program? I
There's
read
a bill
about it.
before the legislature.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And historically, what we found is that, like you say, they learn skills and then they want to go and do their own thing. And that might really shift now that land is really not all that accessible to people at that stage. And so I don't know, you guys started kind of doing your own thing by moving across the country and learning what you wanted to learn, and that, but not everybody has that mobility and focus, I get. And then there's the economic part of, like, our apprentices, when we first started, only made $150 a week. And now I have an apprentice coming that wants to make $15 an hour and get room and board. Like, whoa, okay. There's a big economic difference in the young people's circumstances now. They've just maybe gone to college and they have college debt to pay, and you have to find a place to live possibly at $1,000 a month, and just the expenses that people incur now almost preclude being able to work for not much money, and you can get jobs for a lot of money. So it's definitely a dilemma. How you bridge that, at a supportive level, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's a really different world from the days when MAFCA started the apprenticeship program. You know, they had hundreds of people applying to that program and many farmers taking advantage of it. And there are absolutely still farmers who are able to find apprentices. Some of the downsides of that are having to retrain your workforce every season. So if you don't have someone who's going to stick around either year round or year after year, that can be time consuming and therefore expensive for a farmer, maybe not as expensive as trying to pay someone what we would now consider to be a living wage plus benefits. So it's a much more individualized decision based on the kind of farm. You know, do they have housing available? Usually if a farmer contacts me and says, I think I want to have an apprentice, I think I want to have, some sort of a training program, my first question is, do you have housing available? Because if you do not, you're almost out of luck unless you happen to be located someplace with a lot of local affordable housing. And I don't think that place exists in Maine right now.
Yeah, is this working? Okay. So this is a question actually about land use here in southern Maine and tensions between housing and farming. And I'm speaking from Auburn. So if you're reading the local paper, you know this is an issue. And I guess one of the things that concerns folks in Auburn as we think about whether or not land that's been protected for agriculture and conservation gets shifted over to allow for more residential housing is whether there are conflicts between people who want to live in sort of nice rural areas, but think kind of, you know, like imagine kind of sprawl, right? Houses with sprawl. And whether there's a conflict then between those residences and farming. So for example, if you're a dairy farmer and you're milking at 4 o'clock in the morning and you're spreading manure and you're, you know, there's a certain amount of noise and so forth, does that lead to conflict with neighbors who may have moved up from, you know, so I mean, looking for rural quiet, but not quite understanding what it's going to mean to live right beside a farm. And so I guess I was just wondering what your experience might have been, whether you could speak to that. I mean, there are other reasons why we think we need to protect agricultural land in Auburn, but I wondered if you could address that. I think we absolutely need to protect the agricultural land. It doesn't come back. You know, you can't take cellar holes and create, I mean, we see old foundations come back, but it's an irreversible loss. And I think your point of people don't really understand what it means to move into a rural area where there's active agricultural things going on is very accurate. So therefore, we need to hold on to those agricultural zones because there'll be unhappy people and a lot of political pressure to make changes that won't go the right direction. If it's there to preserve agriculture and a rural character, then end of story, kind of. I do know the housing thing needs to be addressed somehow. And you know, the old concept of clustering and, you know, preserving the places that need to be preserved to protect the soil, and then having, you know, marginal land or other places be better for development of housing, you know, makes more sense to me.
I would also add that there is a long existing law on the books in Maine called Right to Farm Law under Title VII, which essentially gives protection to farms from nuisance complaints, provided that they are operating, utilizing best management practices. So that dairy farmer is only spreading the manure at the appropriate time of the year, or is doing X, Y, and Z for which there are best management practices. So fortunately, there's that insulation to a certain degree, but I understand that rude awakening that might occur if someone is moving into a rural community and not necessarily understanding farm life nearby. But thankfully, we have that on the books so that a farmer is not going to be sued for nuisance, et cetera. So I think we've got time for one last question in the back, and I love your hat, by the way.
Are you able to point us in a direction to access resources, assistance, whether that be state, federal, or legal, actually would be great. Assistance available to citizens of certain towns. Someone mentioned the town just prior to me that are attempting to change agriculture, resource protection, forestry lands to like low density country residential, potentially strip zoning, so many different possibilities. So looking for resources that can help us sort of fight that fight and add to our bag, just in terms of those threats to, you know, the ag property, threats to agriculture, threats to forestry, threats to wildlife, conservation, recreation. We just need more assistance somehow. Where can we find that?
Well, I can tell you about one of my colleagues that I frequently work with at the Department of Agriculture. Alex Redfield works in farmland protection, and he also helps to educate around some of the tax laws that farmers can take advantage of, like open space and tree growth and agriculture. But he also helps work with municipalities around how to best craft policies that maintain agricultural land so that it can, sort of exist harmoniously. All of the other things a municipality has to do. Every town is a little bit different, has different goals, depending on the population or the natural resources or, any number of things. So there's no sort of cookie cutter approach to that. But I do think contacting someone like Alex, come in and help work with your individual town or city to talk about how to get to, the best solution for the goals that your town is trying to reach. Alex Redfield. I will give it to you after this.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your time and interest today in this topic. I know that we've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully some takeaways are the clear value of our agricultural producers and our natural resources in Maine. So there are winter farmers markets that you can avail yourselves of. You can find producers on realmaine.com, which is a website the Department of Agriculture promotes to connect consumers in and outside of Maine with Maine farmers and producers. And please pay attention. Please pay attention to what is happening in your communities, in the region, and remember to buy local and support your farmers. So thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate it.